They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sometimes it's served steaming hot before the workday even ends. When Marcus Reynolds walked into my office that Monday morning with his smug smile and termination papers, he had no idea he was about to lose more than just an employee. He was about to lose everything that made his pathetic little empire worth running. My name is Catherine Mills, and I'm the woman who brought down Zenith Technologies in a single afternoon. Not through sabotage, not through corporate espionage, but through something far more devastating: the truth. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I sat at my desk, reviewing the quarterly reports that would never see the light of day. At 28, I had already spent 3 years climbing the corporate ladder at Zenith Technologies, a mid-sized consulting firm that specialized in government contracts and corporate restructuring. What most people didn't know was that I wasn't just another account manager. I was the backbone of their most lucrative operations, the invisible force behind their biggest wins, and the keeper of secrets that could topple kingdoms. Marcus Reynolds, our vice president of operations, was a man who believed his Harvard MBA made him untouchable. He was wrong. Standing at 6'2" with prematurely gray hair that he wore like a crown, Marcus had a way of making everyone around him feel small. His corner office overlooked the city, and he ruled his domain with the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences for his actions. But every king has his weaknesses, and I had spent 3 years cataloging every single one of his. The morning started like any other. I arrived at 7:30, an hour before most of my colleagues, and settled into my routine of reviewing overnight emails and preparing for the day's meetings. The coffee was still brewing when I noticed Marcus's assistant, Jennifer, hovering near my cubicle with an expression that could only be described as apologetic dread. "Catherine," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "Marcus wants to see you in his office. Now." I knew. The moment she spoke, I knew exactly what was coming. There's a particular energy that fills the air before a corporate execution, a heaviness that settles over everything like fog. I had felt it building for weeks, ever since I had started asking too many questions about the Meridian Industries account. I closed my laptop, smoothed down my navy blazer, and walked toward Marcus's office with the measured steps of someone who had already accepted their fate. The hallway seemed longer than usual, lined with the faces of colleagues who suddenly found their computer screens incredibly fascinating. Marcus's office was a monument to corporate excess. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a mahogany desk that probably cost more than most people's cars, and walls lined with awards and photos of him shaking hands with politicians and executives. He was sitting behind his desk, fingers steepled, wearing the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Catherine, please have a seat." His voice was smooth, practiced, like he had delivered this speech 100 times before. I sat down, crossing my legs and maintaining eye contact. "Good morning, Marcus. You wanted to see me?" He slid a manila folder across the desk toward me. "I'm afraid we need to discuss your future with Zenith Technologies." I opened the folder, though I already knew what I would find. Termination papers, a non-disclosure agreement, and a severance package that was generous enough to make most people grateful for their silence. The official reason was restructuring and budget constraints, but we both knew the real reason. "This is effective immediately," Marcus continued, his tone professional but cold. "We appreciate your contributions to the company, and we hope you understand that this decision wasn't made lightly." I looked up from the papers, studying his face. Marcus Reynolds was many things, but he wasn't a good liar. His left eye always twitched when he was being dishonest, and it was practically dancing now. "I see," I said quietly. "And this has nothing to do with the questions I've been asking about the Meridian contract?" For just a moment, his mask slipped. The confident smile wavered, and I saw something else underneath. Fear. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Catherine. This is purely a business decision." I smiled then, the kind of smile that made people uncomfortable. "Of course it is." I signed the papers without argument, shook his hand with professional courtesy, and walked back to my desk to pack my things. My colleagues watched with the morbid fascination of people witnessing a car accident, but no one said anything. Corporate firings were like natural disasters. Everyone was just grateful it wasn't happening to them. As I cleaned out my desk, I made sure to grab my personal laptop, the one I had been using to research the Meridian contract on my own time. I also pocketed a small flash drive that contained backups of several important files. Not company files, of course. I would never steal proprietary information. But copies of publicly available documents, email chains from my personal account, and research I had conducted independently. That was fair game. By 10:30, I was walking out of Zenith Technologies for the last time, carrying a small cardboard box and a wealth of knowledge that Marcus Reynolds had severely underestimated. The first thing I did was drive to a small cafe downtown and order the strongest coffee they had. I needed to think, to plan, and to decide exactly how I was going to use what I knew. The Meridian Industries contract was worth $75 million over 5 years, making it the largest deal in Zenith's history. It was also built on a foundation of lies, inflated capabilities, and promises that the company could never keep. I had discovered the truth 3 weeks ago, buried in a mountain of technical specifications and financial projections. Zenith had presented themselves as having capabilities they didn't possess, experience they had never gained, and resources they couldn't access. Worse, they had done it with the full knowledge that they would subcontract the actual work to firms in countries with questionable labor practices and environmental standards. The government client, believing they were getting premium American expertise, had no idea they were essentially paying premium prices for work that would be done by the lowest bidder halfway around the world. It was fraud, plain and simple, but it was fraud that would be nearly impossible to prove without inside knowledge. Marcus had fired me because I had been asking too many questions, requesting too much documentation, and getting too close to the truth. He thought that by removing me from the equation, he could proceed with his fraudulent contract in peace. He was wrong. I spent the rest of the morning in that cafe, using my personal laptop to compile everything I knew about the Meridian contract. I organized emails, financial documents, technical specifications, and witness statements into a comprehensive package that told the complete story of Zenith's deception. The key piece of evidence was an email chain between Marcus and David Chen, the lead engineer on the project. In it, Marcus explicitly acknowledged that Zenith didn't have the capabilities to fulfill the contract as promised, but instructed David to make it work by outsourcing to cheaper alternatives. The email was dated 3 days before the contract was signed, proving that the fraud was intentional and premeditated. I also had recorded phone calls, perfectly legal in our state with single-party consent, where Marcus discussed the plan to massage the numbers and promise them the moon to secure the contract. His own words would be his downfall. By noon, I had assembled a 40-page document that laid out the entire scheme in excruciating detail. The evidence was overwhelming, the timeline was clear, and the financial impact was precisely calculated. Any investigator who read this report would have everything they needed to bring down not just the contract, but potentially the entire company. But I wasn't done yet. Marcus Reynolds had made this personal when he fired me to cover up his crimes. He deserved more than just exposure. He deserved to watch his empire crumble in real time. At 1 o'clock, I made my first call to Jessica Martinez, the procurement officer at the Department of Commerce who had been our primary contact for the Meridian contract. Jessica was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had always been professional but friendly during our interactions. "Catherine," she said, sounding surprised. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. How's the project preparation going?" "Actually, Jessica, that's why I'm calling. I'm no longer with Zenith Technologies as of this morning. And there are some serious concerns about the Meridian contract that I need to discuss with you." There was a pause. "What kind of concerns?" "The kind that could result in federal fraud charges if they're not addressed immediately. Do you have time to meet today?" Jessica agreed to meet me at 3 o'clock at her office downtown. That gave me 2 hours to prepare my presentation and gather any additional evidence I might need. I spent the time cross-referencing public records, verifying dates and details. and creating a timeline that would be easy for investigators to follow. The Department of Commerce building was an intimidating structure of glass and steel that housed dozens of government agencies. Jessica's office was on the 15th floor, and she greeted me with the kind of professional concern that suggested she had already started making phone calls. "Catherine, I have to say, your call today has me worried. Before we start, I need to ask, are you doing this because you were terminated this morning?" I appreciated her directness. "Jessica, I was terminated because I discovered what I'm about to show you. Marcus Reynolds fired me to keep me quiet. But that just convinced me that this information needs to see the light of day." I opened my laptop and began walking her through the evidence. Jessica was an experienced government contractor who had seen her share of corporate shenanigans, but even she seemed shocked by the scope of Zenith's deception. This is extensive," she said, scrolling through the documents. "If what you're showing me is accurate, Zenith has committed multiple federal crimes." "It's all accurate," I replied. "And I can verify every single piece of evidence. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Jessica leaned back in her chair, clearly processing the implications. "I need to make some calls. This contract needs to be suspended immediately, and we need to launch a full investigation." "How long will that take?" "With evidence this comprehensive, hours, not days. We'll have auditors and investigators on site before the end of the business day." I felt a surge of satisfaction. "There's one more thing you should know. Marcus Reynolds thinks he's untouchable because of his connections and his track record. He's probably in his office right now, celebrating the fact that he silenced the only person who could expose him." Jessica smiled grimly. "Well, he's about to learn that the federal government doesn't appreciate being defrauded." I left the Department of Commerce building feeling lighter than I had in months. The wheels of justice were now in motion, and there was nothing Marcus Reynolds could do to stop them. But I wasn't finished with my revenge yet. My next call was to Amanda Foster, an investigative journalist at the Washington Tribune who specialized in corporate fraud and government corruption. Amanda had won a Pulitzer Prize for her exposé on defense contractor fraud, and she had the kind of reputation that made corporate executives break out in cold sweats. "Amanda, this is Catherine Mills. I have a story that I think you'll find very interesting." We met at a small restaurant near the newspaper's offices. Amanda was a sharp woman in her 40s with an eye for detail and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when she caught wind of a good story. I walked her through the same evidence I had shown Jessica. But this time, I focused on the broader implications. "This isn't just about one contract," I explained. "This is about a systematic pattern of fraud that goes back years. Zenith Technologies has been overcharging the government, outsourcing work to substandard contractors, and lying about their capabilities on dozens of projects." Amanda's eyes lit up. "How many contracts are we talking about?" "At least 15 major ones that I know of, worth over $200 million combined. And Marcus Reynolds has been at the center of all of them." "What's your timeline for this story?" I checked my watch. It was 3:45. "How fast can you work?" Amanda grinned. "For a story like this, I can have something online by 6 and in print tomorrow morning." "Perfect. There's just one thing I ask. I want to be the one to deliver the news to Marcus Reynolds personally." We shook hands, and I left Amanda to her work. The next few hours were going to be very interesting. At 4 o'clock, I received a call from Jessica Martinez. "Catherine, I thought you should know. We've just suspended the Meridian contract pending investigation. Federal agents are on their way to Zenith Technologies right now." "How did Marcus react?" "He's demanding to speak with our director and threatening to sue everyone involved. I don't think he realizes how serious this is yet." I thanked Jessica and hung up, then immediately called Zenith Technologies. Jennifer answered the phone with her usual professional cheerfulness. "Zenith Technologies, this is Jennifer." "Jennifer, it's Catherine. Is Marcus available?" "Catherine, I thought you were, aren't you? No longer employed there? That's correct. But I need to speak with Marcus about something urgent regarding the Meridian contract." There was a pause. and I could hear muffled voices in the background. After a moment, Marcus came on the line. Catherine, I'm not sure why you're calling, but I have to remind you that you signed a non-disclosure agreement this morning. Marcus, I'm calling as a courtesy to let you know that the Meridian contract has been suspended and federal investigators are on their way to your office. You have about 15 minutes before they arrive. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear the blood draining from his face. What are you talking about? He finally managed. I'm talking about the fact that your entire fraudulent scheme has been exposed. The Department of Commerce has all the evidence they need to prove that you knowingly misrepresented Zenith's capabilities. And they're not happy about being defrauded out of $75 million. You can't prove anything, Marcus said, but his voice was shaking. Actually, I can prove everything. I have emails, recorded phone calls, financial documents, and witness statements that paint a very clear picture of your criminal enterprise. Oh, and Marcus? The Washington Tribune is running the story tonight. I hope you have a good lawyer. I hung up the phone and smiled. It was 4:10 on a Monday afternoon, and Marcus Reynolds's world was about to come crashing down. I drove back to the Zenith Technologies building, parking across the street where I could watch the drama unfold. At 4:20, 3 black SUVs pulled up to the building's entrance. Federal agents in dark suits began filing into the lobby, carrying boxes of equipment and looking very serious. Through the building's glass windows, I could see people on the upper floors pointing and staring. Word was spreading quickly through the office, and I could imagine the panic that was setting in. My phone rang. It was Amanda Foster. Catherine, the story is live. We're calling it the $75 million lie. How one company defrauded the federal government. It's already getting shared like crazy on social media. I pulled up the Tribune's website on my phone and read the headline with deep satisfaction. The story was comprehensive, devastating, and completely factual. Amanda had done her homework, and Marcus Reynolds was now the subject of a federal investigation and national media attention. At 4:30. I watched Marcus walk out of the building flanked by federal agents. He wasn't in handcuffs, but he looked like a man who had just seen his entire life collapse in real time. His face was pale, his confident swagger was gone, and he kept glancing around as if looking for an escape route. As he passed my car, our eyes met for just a moment. I rolled down my window and gave him a little wave. The look of pure hatred he gave me was worth every risk I had taken. The federal investigation moved quickly. Within a week, Zenith Technologies was facing multiple felony charges for fraud, false statements, and conspiracy. The company's stock price plummeted, major clients began canceling contracts, and several employees were arrested. Marcus Reynolds was indicted on 17 federal charges and faced up to 40 years in prison. His assets were frozen, his reputation was destroyed, and his Harvard MBA couldn't save him from the consequences of his actions. The ripple effects were enormous. The investigation revealed that Zenith's fraudulent practices went back years and involved dozens of government contracts. The total amount of fraud was estimated at over $300 million, making it one of the largest contractor fraud cases in recent history. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months after Marcus's arrest, I received a call from Teresa Kim, the new director of the Department of Commerce's Contractor Oversight Division. The department was looking for someone with intimate knowledge of corporate fraud to help them identify and prevent future schemes. Catherine, we need someone who understands how these fraudulent operations work from the inside. Someone who can spot the warning signs and help us protect taxpayer dollars. I accepted the position immediately. My new job was to investigate government contractors and expose fraud wherever I found it. The irony was delicious. Marcus Reynolds had fired me to cover up his crimes, and now I was being paid by the federal government to catch people just like him. The work was challenging and rewarding in ways I had never imagined. I was making a real difference, protecting taxpayers from corporate predators and using my skills for something that actually mattered. Every fraudulent contractor I exposed, every crooked executive I helped prosecute, was a small victory against the kind of corruption that Marcus Reynolds had represented. 6 months later, I was testifying before Congress about corporate fraud and government contracting. The hearing room was packed with reporters, government officials, and corporate executives who were suddenly very interested in compliance and transparency. As I laid out the systemic problems that allowed companies like Zenith to defraud the government, I thought about that Monday morning when Marcus Reynolds had walked into my office with his termination papers. He had thought he was eliminating a problem, but he had actually created his own worst nightmare. The truth, as it turned out, was far more powerful than any corporate position or Harvard MBA. Marcus had learned that lesson the hard way, and he would have the rest of his life to think about it from his federal prison cell. During the trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a man who had systematically defrauded the government for years, using charm and connections to hide his crimes. The defense tried to portray Marcus as a victim of overzealous prosecution, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 17 charges. Marcus was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution of over $100 million. As he was led away in handcuffs, I was sitting in the gallery, watching justice finally being served. The man who had fired me to cover up his crimes was now paying the ultimate price for his arrogance and greed. The victims of Marcus's fraud, the taxpayers who had been overcharged, the employees who had lost their jobs when Zenith collapsed, the legitimate contractors who had been undercut by fraudulent bids, finally had their justice. But perhaps the most satisfying part of the whole experience was the knowledge that I had brought down a criminal enterprise using nothing more than the truth and a determination to see justice served. Marcus Reynolds had underestimated me, and that underestimation had cost him everything. In the end, the story of Marcus Reynolds and Zenith Technologies became a cautionary tale about corporate fraud and the importance of whistleblower protections. My case was cited in congressional hearings, used in business school ethics classes, and became a landmark example of how one person with the courage to speak truth to power could bring down an entire criminal organization. The personal cost was significant. I lost friends who saw me as a traitor, faced legal challenges from Zenith's remaining executives, and dealt with attempts to discredit my testimony. But every sleepless night, every legal brief, every hostile cross-examination was worth it when I saw Marcus Reynolds in his orange jumpsuit, finally facing the consequences of his actions. Today, I'm still working for the Department of Commerce, leading a team of investigators who specialize in contractor fraud. We've exposed dozens of schemes, recovered hundreds of millions of dollars in fraudulent charges, and sent numerous corrupt executives to prison. Every morning when I walk into my office, I think about that Monday morning when Marcus Reynolds thought he could silence me with a termination letter. He had no idea that firing me would be the beginning of the end for his criminal empire. The lesson is simple: never underestimate the power of someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain by telling the truth. Marcus Reynolds learned that lesson the hard way, and his story serves as a warning to every corporate executive who thinks they can commit fraud without consequences. Revenge, it turns out, is best served with a side of justice and a garnish of federal prison time. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself. The $75 million contract that Marcus thought would secure his legacy instead became the instrument of his destruction. By 4 o'clock that Monday afternoon, his empire was crumbling, his reputation was destroyed, and his freedom was measured in hours rather than years. They say that crime doesn't pay. But in Marcus Reynolds' case, it cost him everything he had ever worked for. And all because he made the mistake of firing the one person who knew exactly what he had been doing. Sometimes justice is swift, sometimes it's slow, but it always finds its way to the truth. And the truth, as Marcus Reynolds learned too late, is the most powerful weapon of all.